Carla Walker. Carla Walker attended Western Hills High School in Fort Worth, Texas, as a 17-year-old junior in 1974. Carla was just 4 feet 11 inches tall, and her honey blonde hair hung below her shoulders. Rodney McCoy was her boyfriend. He was the football team's quarterback and was characterized as a wiry, sweet young man. Rodney and Carla discussed enrolling at Texas Tech University together. She confided in her closest friends that she was positive that she and Rodney would be married and have children in the future. Rodney came to the Walkers' Benbrook, far west Fort Worth, house on the evening of February 16, 1974, to drive Carla to the school's Valentine Day dance. Rodney invited a second couple to travel Camp Bowie Boulevard and the Benbrook traffic circle with him and Carla after the celebration, which was scheduled to end at around 11:30. They made stops at Taco Bell and Mr. Quick Hamburgers, two popular hangouts for teenagers. Rodney and Carla drove to Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, a nearby bowling venue where Carla used the restroom after dropping off the others. Carla got into the car and the passenger door flung open. Rodney glimpsed the man's height, stature, and short brown hair. He started hitting Rodney in the head with a pistol's butt. The rifle magazine clip eventually came loose and dropped into the parking lot. Carla was grabbed by the man. He said, "You're coming with me, aren't you, sweetie?" To Rodney, who was barely aware at the time, Carla said, "Rodney, go get my dad. Get my dad, please." It was around 1 in the morning when Rodney took over the wheel. The Walkers' house was less than a mile away, so he drove there quickly. He slammed on the brakes as he crossed the curb and rolled onto the front yard. Leighton and Doris, Carla's parents, were still up, playing dominoes in the dining room with family.
Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free. Now, let's move on with the video.
In the living room, Carla's 18-year-old sister Cindy and her 12-year-old brother Jim were watching TV. They were startled to see Rodney with blood streaming down his face when they heard someone pounding on the front door. He was in a panic. He said, "Mr. Walker, they got her. They will cause her great pain." Retired Lieutenant Colonel Leighton reached for his handgun and dashed to the bowling alley. Using the family's rotary phone, Doris contacted the operator and requested to speak with a police officer. They searched the parking lot and discovered the magazine clip that had come loose from the attacker's gun in Carla's purse. Other police officers searched for Carla by driving squad cars through the neighborhood. More people joined the hunt as the sun rose. A handful flew in helicopters around the city, peering with binoculars. On Monday morning, when school started again, investigators went to Western Hills High. In an attempt to find anyone who appeared out of place, they examined contact sheets of pictures taken during the dance. In the halls, they stopped children and asked them whether they knew of anyone who would wish to harm Carla. 4 days after Carla vanished, on February 20, 1974, 2 of the officers tasked with her search were traveling about 5 miles southwest of the bowling alley on a secluded 2-lane road close to Benbrook Lake. They pulled over to have a look inside after spotting a culvert and a concrete tunnel intended to allow water to flow beneath the road. A young woman was seen by them lying on her back. She had significant bruises and scratches all over her face and neck. Carla was the one. There were no ligature traces around her neck, giving the impression that she had been strangled. Investigators concluded that he had used his hands to choke her. The top page of the Star-Telegram was nearly entirely devoted to news of Carla's ordeal. More than 1,050 people attended her funeral at the Western Hills Church of Christ, far more than the little sanctuary could accommodate. Detectives from the local police departments organized a task team, according to Fort Worth officials. There was not much for the group to look into. There were no fingerprints found on Carla's body or clothes. Rodney's head wounds were the source of the blood on her clothes. Though bodily fluid traces had been discovered, DNA identification technology was not yet available. Furthermore, there were no license plate scanners on the sides of highways or security cameras in parking lots during that time. The team did up a 24-hour hotline for tips. Officers stood behind metal desks at the downtown police headquarters, drinking lukewarm coffee while they listened to locals send along the names of those they thought may be involved. Numerous callers informed the cops that Carla was abducted by two pot sellers, a carnival employee at the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo, and a solitary young man who frequently bowled at the alley where Carla was abducted. The night before the dance, they had heard rumors of a boy who had gotten into a fight with Rodney at Mr. Quick Hamburgers. In an attempt to get additional information out of Rodney, who had a head injury during the incident, the investigators also recruited a hypnotist. The most important thing he could remember, though, was that Carla's kidnapper had worn a brown or tan cowboy hat. Rodney sobbed when the hypnotist snapped his fingers, causing him to awaken. The fact that he was unable to save his sweetheart was causing him immense internal turmoil. In one meeting, the detectives on the task force talked about another unresolved crime that happened on February 7, 1973, nearly to the day Carla's did. That evening, Becky Martin, a young woman, left her house to attend a night class at Tarrant County Junior College's South Campus and never came back. Almost 7 weeks later, her body was discovered. The cause could not be ascertained because it was so degraded. According to the medical examiner, Becky might have been shot in the stomach, strangled, or perhaps stabbed. The location of Becky's body, which was discovered in a culvert just outside the city limits, piqued the investigators' interest the most in this case. The two girls separated by a year in two culverts. For detectives, it just appeared too coincidental. Despite their silence, the investigators started searching for a serial offender. A month after Carla was killed in March, the task force had just one little lead to work with. The magazine clip that was discovered in the parking area of the bowling alley belonged to a more recent Model 22 Ruger handgun, the detectives discovered. They requested the identities of any Fort Worth residents who had acquired that model from the federal government's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The task force proceeded to question every individual on the list of several dozen that the ATF had produced. Glenn McCurley, a 31-year-old truck driver, was one of the men on the list. McCurley, the oldest of three sons, grew up in West Texas. His parents sent him to the Westview Boys' Home in southwest Oklahoma when he was a teenager. Sponsored by the Churches of Christ, Westview positions itself as a haven for boys who are deprived because of a family member's illness, boys who are having serious difficulties residing with their family, boys in need of supervision, and delinquent boys, boys who have broken the law but do not require treatment or incarceration, as well as boys who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected. McCurley's experience at the home was obviously not life-changing, though it's unclear why he was sent there or for how long. He had left Westview by February 1961 and was living in Abilene, Texas when he committed auto theft. He left that automobile there after that and stole another. He was being pursued by the State Highway Patrol when one of his tires burst. He tried to flee on foot after driving the car onto an empty lot but was apprehended right away. McCurley entered a guilty plea in court and was given a 2-year sentence. At the age of 19, he was set free in the early spring of 1962. After a while, he relocated to Midland, where he became friends with Judy Watson, a blonde high school student. McCurley wed Judy on February 16, 1963, at a Baptist church. The youthful duo relocated to a modest rental residence. Eventually, McCurley was hired by the U.S. Postal Service as a truck driver, and his route included the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Craig and Roddy are the two sons Judy gave birth to. Then, in 1972, McCurley relocated his small family to a West Fort Worth neighborhood. McCurley and Judy joined Ridgely West Baptist Church and registered their boys in the public primary school. McCurley secured a new employment as a truck driver, transporting prefabricated concrete slabs to building sites. Judy was employed at the church's daycare facility. A man acquainted with McCurley observed an unappealing behavior. He would say something like, "Take a look at that," when he saw a lovely girl. Two detectives showed up at McCurley's house at the beginning of March 1974 to question him about his Ruger 22 pistol. McCurley informed the authorities that the rifle had been taken from his pickup truck when he was fishing 6 weeks prior when they inquired about it. Then, after agreeing to travel to downtown, he took and passed a polygraph exam. He was immediately ruled out as a possible suspect by the task force. The investigators' progress was still somewhat slow by the late spring of 1974. Although the task force didn't formally dissolve, several of the detectives received orders from their managers to resume working on other investigations. Every now and then, strangers would phone the Walkers, a lot of them anonymous, saying they knew who killed Carla. Layton spoke with each individual. He made notes and stored them in a cigar box-sized metal box. He circled the locations on maps where he had been told the offender lived and jotted down the names and addresses of possible suspects. Until he was certain that the guilty individual was in jail, he was not going to stop. Jim, Carla's younger brother, started assisting his father in the pursuit of the culprit after he reached 16 and obtained a driver's license. On several occasions, he would skulk around the Ridgely Bowl parking lot on the anniversary, searching for anyone who seemed off. Jim joined the high school football and wrestling teams, learned boxing techniques at the Panther Boys Club, and enjoyed long runs around his neighborhood. Jim remarked, "I wanted to be prepared in case I ever found the culprit. My strategy was to subdue him and carry him off to a remote location, perhaps in West Texas, where no one would be able to hear him scream." Nearly 3 years after Carla's body was discovered, on February 19, 1977, a 25-year-old vocational nurse named June Ward was found dead next to a South Fort Worth curb. With the exception of a bra strap around her neck, June was completely nude. The lone reporter said that she had been struck on the head and strangled with a hefty, pointed weapon. The two crimes were so similar that detectives who had been part of the Carla Walker task force couldn't help but notice them. Then, on July 9, 1980, the death of Denise Hoag, a 19-year-old transient who was characterized as jobless in the papers, was discovered in South Fort Worth, just a short distance from a stream bridge. She had also been choked. The body of Christy Tower, a waitress at the family Billy Bob's Texas nightclub in the Stockyards, was found in a field north of the city in February 1983, 2.5 years later. Electrical wire was used to bind her hands, and another piece of wire was wrapped around her neck. Christie's case, like the other crimes, was never fully solved. However, detectives learned an odd piece of information a few days after her death was discovered. They discovered that Christie's handbag had been discovered in a dumpster near the Champ Bowie Boulevard nightclub, Cheers. Cheers was situated around 0.5 miles away from the Brunswick Ridgely bowling alley, where Carla was abducted in February 1974. Concerns among the locals over the possibility of a serial offender were growing. When 23-year-old Catherine Davis, an aspiring model, vanished on September 9, 1984, these worries intensified. In a field in far south Fort Worth, her body was discovered. Marilyn Hartman, a 25-year-old middle school teacher, was discovered strangled and bound in her Fort Worth bedroom about 1 month later on October 19th. 3 days later, Cindy Heller, a 23-year-old former beauty contestant and graduate of Texas Christian University, vanished, last seen close to Hewlin Mall. On the campus of Texas Christian University, she was subsequently discovered strangled in a creek bed. The catastrophes continued to mount. Another middle school teacher in the area, Catherine Jackson, was discovered naked in her bathtub with the water running on November 26, 1984. A cable had been used to strangle her. 2 weeks later, 21-year-old Angela Ewart, a part-time FM rock station programmer and model, moved out of her fiancé's Southwest Fort Worth home. Her automobile was discovered abandoned along a roadway in the southern part of the city the next day, and her decaying body was later located in a field north of Fort Worth. A few days before Christmas, on December 22nd, Regina Grover, 21, was spotted leaving The Keg, a restaurant on Camp Bowie, with her boyfriend. She was discovered the following day, having been strangled and drowning in a creek beneath a North Fort Worth bridge. Her partner had been fatally bludgeoned when he was discovered in his flat bed. Women in Fort Worth were in a panic, particularly those in the southwest area of the city. The local press covered the dramatic growth in gun and mace sales. Over 3,000 people, the majority of whom were women, attended a free self-defense session hosted by the police department. Another task group was organized by the police department. Police Chief H.F. Hopkins said, "We're going to break this." Every suspect was questioned by detectives. including freelance photographers and ex-cons with lengthy criminal histories. However, the study yielded no results. The only good news was that there were less crimes. The offender seems to have backed off, assuming there was only one. Up until February 24, 1986, that is, a woman's naked body was found partially covered by a blanket and resting on a slope close to a central Fort Worth park by a passerby. Despite the fact that she had been strangled, the police were unable to identify her using dental records or fingerprints, and they were also not notified of any missing women reports that could have offered a lead. 1 year came to an end, and then another, and this time it really did seem as though the man who was perpetrating all these crimes, who was unknown, had finally withdrawn. Jim, Carla Walker's younger brother, had persisted. Jim had gone to Sam Houston State University after graduating from Western Hills High School. There, he studied abnormal psychology and read books on serial criminals in an effort to gain a deeper understanding of what he called the criminal mentality. He returned to Fort Worth after receiving his college degree and submitted an application to join the police force there as an officer. His goal was to become a detective, obtain Carla's files, and identify the offending individual. But Jim discovered there was a problem with his vision during a training session at the academy's firing range. He was later identified by a physician as having a congenital eye ailment. After being forced to leave the academy, he started working as a security guard at a local General Dynamics office, a weapons contractor. However, he didn't stop looking for the guilty individual. Looking for fresh clues to follow, Jim went through the notes in Layton's metal box after his father died in 1987 from a heart attack. Jim bought his parents' house in 2015 and moved in with his wife following the death of his mother. He remarked, "I wanted to be there in case somebody ever woke up at 3 in the morning and came to confess." Jim submitted a request, and in January 2019, investigators Leah Wagner and Officer Jeff Bennett decided to re-examine Carla's case. One of the people they re-interviewed was Rodney McCoy, Carla's former lover, who had left Fort Worth as soon as he finished from high school to work on an oil rig and had informed his family that he had to relocate as far away as possible. Eventually, Wagner and Bennett found him living close to Austin after he had returned to Texas. Investigators put up a statement on the police department's Facebook page in an attempt to find more witnesses. They received a dozen or so replies. One from a woman saying her former husband had grown up in Carla's area and had saved a stack of newspaper stories about her case, which he would sometimes read again. The ex-wife claimed it was probably a sign he was in charge. To the dismay of his former spouse, the ex-husband was able to demonstrate that he had been out of town the weekend Carla was abducted. Physical evidence was what the investigators required, and the culprit's DNA was naturally the greatest physical evidence they could hope to find. Since Carla's death, DNA identification technology has not only advanced beyond anyone's wildest dreams, but it has also advanced significantly. There were even labs these days that focused on genealogy mapping, where technicians connect the DNA of an unknown individual to the ancestors of that individual using publicly available information. Luckily for Wagner and Bennett, Carla's dress and other items she'd worn the night she was killed had been meticulously stored in paper bags in the evidence lab of the police department. This meant that there was still a possibility that specialists might find a viable sample of her DNA. But whether the DNA had deteriorated after all these years was unknown, and that would keep the technicians from creating a complete genetic profile of the man in question. Again, the Fort Worth Police Department might have to spend up to $20,000 on Carla's clothing for DNA testing, money that would have been better used on open investigations. Wagner and Bennett knew the odds were stacked against them, but they were determined to follow at least one strong lead. Their investigation then went in an unexpected direction. Vincent Strange, a Fort Worth aerospace technician and enthusiast for true crime, was 40 years old. He started a podcast about unresolved Texas cases in 2017. He had been researching Carla Walker's case online and decided to write her narrative as his first. He spoke with several of Carla's acquaintances and her siblings, Jim and Cindy. Diane Kuykendall was one person who gave it some attention. Diane had attended the same school as Carla. In the corridor, Carla never failed to smile at her, even though they were strangers. Diane expressed her gratitude to Carla and wished there was a way she could repay her. Diane made the decision to take a plane to Nashville to go to CrimeCon, a 3-day real crime convention that takes place every year and recently drew 5,000 attendees. 80 copies of a leaflet she had written on Carla's plight were brought by her. She distributed the booklets to celebrities like Nancy Grace of Fox News, Keith Morrison of Dateline, and Paul Holes, an Oxygen Network retired investigator. Intrigued, Paul Holes persuaded Oxygen to shell over $18,000 for the expense of having Carla's clothing tested for DNA. Technicians in a California lab discovered some undamaged, pure body fluid. They created a complete DNA profile from that fluid, which they then submitted to CODIS, a national law enforcement database that houses the DNA of millions of criminal defendants. But CODIS was unable to locate a match. Paul Holes and his team reached out to a Texas-based lab that specializes in genealogy mapping, but the technicians there were likewise unsuccessful. The Othram CEO, David Mittleman, then reached out to Paul Holes. He expressed optimism that his specialized DNA identification technique, which made use of genome sequencing, would be able to locate a match. Officer Bennett received a call from David Mittleman early on July 4, 2020. He remarked, "We've linked the DNA to a specific family tree. The surname McCurley is used." Following more examinations and investigations by the police, Mittleman and Bennett finally identified Glenn Samuel McCurley Jr., who was residing in Fort Worth at the time of Carla's death. Bennett saw that Glenn McCurley Jr., the truck driver, had reported his Ruger 22 as stolen to the police in 1974. After conducting a background investigation on McCurley, Wagner and Bennett found not much information. He had no run-ins with the law as far as they could determine, save from his 1961 felony conviction for automobile theft at the age of 18. By then, McCurley was no longer a full-time truck driver. He worked part-time as a fitness club maintenance worker and as a handyman. Bennett and Wagner made the decision to see him. They showed up at the McCurley's house without warning. McCurley and his spouse Judy greeted the detectives with a smile and cordially invited them into their living room. McCurley discussed his previous experiences driving trucks. Judy stated that she had worked at the Ridgely West Baptist daycare program for 32 years, resigning in 2004 due to health concerns. She also disclosed that her spouse had diabetes and had just undergone liver surgery to remove a tumor the size of a quarter. Judy replied, "We're not ready for this, especially with his cancer." At last, McCurley questioned the investigators, "What do y'all want to talk about?" in a hoarse voice. Wagner declared, "We're going to take you way, way back," in 1974 to be exact. "You might have heard about it because you guys were residing here at the time. A young woman was abducted from a bowling alley." Judy answered right away, "I know exactly which one you're talking about. Walker Carla." Judy then admitted to the detectives that she could recall the Williams Road address of the Walker family. She replied that they had left her room exactly how it was. For years and years, they left her automobile sitting in the driveway. It was simply so incredibly painful to see that car sitting in the driveway when you would pass by. According to Detective Wagner, Bennett and she had revived the inquiry and were getting in touch with people who had been questioned by police in 1974. She said that it's a big case. "And we noticed that they had spoken with you before, Mr. McCurley." Wagner requested that McCurley provide a DNA sample. She emphasized that it would be the simplest way to rule him out as a suspect. McCurley paused. Then he picked up a pen, signed a consent form, and parted his lips to allow Wagner to use a Q-tip to dab the inside of his cheek. Judy begged the cops, "I hope you find out who is responsible," as she continued. "It is important to remember that girl as someone who was important." Members of the U.S. Marshals North Texas Fugitive Task Team visited McCurley's home 11 days later with the intention of apprehending him after lab technicians confirmed that the DNA extracted from his cheek precisely matched the DNA discovered on Carla's bra strap. After being brought downtown to the police department, he gave up the right to an attorney's presence during his questioning. He was sitting by himself in an interview room for a few minutes. He first denied having any part in it. He declared that he had never before seen Carla Walker. At last, he murmured, Okay. Tears finally welling up in his eyes. I suppose I did do it. He admitted to the detectives that he had consumed beer and whiskey for several hours in the afternoon on February 16, 1974. He claimed to have started driving and to have pulled into a few parking lots. He once took a car to the bowling ball location. McCurley appeared to be on the verge of confessing. He claimed to have heard a girl screaming in a neighboring automobile to the detectives instead. I went to check if I could be of any assistance. She was jerked around by this enormous guy who had her up against the door. McCurley claimed to have wrestled with the youngster after opening the front passenger door. After pushing Carla away, he drove her to another parking lot and back to his car. She began to praise me and hug me, and then things got bigger. He asserted that he was unaware of Carla's subsequent events and that everything that transpired between them was voluntary. McCurley entered a not guilty plea following a conversation with his court-appointed attorneys. In court documents, McCurley's counsel contended that Wagner and Bennett had forced McCurley to make a false confession and that the Othram Labs DNA test was faulty. McCurley was also depicted by the lawyers as weak. There is no one to be afraid of this man. To the best of my knowledge, he has had a completely boring life. On June 16, 2021, 9 months later, the first pre-trial hearing was held in public. McCurley was wheeled into the courtroom while wearing a green jumpsuit that was provided by the jail. A few months later, when the trial actually began, Carla's boyfriend Rodney gave testimony on the night she disappeared. Jim Minter, a retired investigator, spoke about the preliminary inquiry into Carla's case while Wagner and Bennett gave testimony regarding their own law enforcement assignments. The jury was shown the powder blue dress that Carla had been wearing the night she was kidnapped by prosecutors Emily Dixon and Divignon. 3 hours of the videotaped interview that Wagner and Bennett had done with McCurley following his arrest were also shown. Subsequently, the prosecution presented an unexpected piece of proof: McCurley's .22 Rummer handgun, which they asserted had been pilfered. It had been tucked away in a compartment above a door when police searched his house. Naturally, the case was over and done. McCurley entered a guilty plea on the third day of the trial, and the court promptly sentenced him to life in prison. Many unanswered questions remained in the wake of the trial. Why would a man without a history of violent crimes like Glenn McCurley have perpetrated such a cruel crime? Was McCurley a sadistic serial killer who previously killed other young Fort Worth ladies? Or was it just an impulsive drunken act? Furthermore, why did he abruptly cease in the middle of the 1980s if he was a serial offender? Had he really had a change of heart? Was there any chance of that happening? Investigations into McCurley's involvement in numerous additional crimes are still ongoing, according to investigators.
Moving on to the next case.
Daniel Ashton Walker. What if a calm morning trip abruptly descended into a terrifying nightmare? How does a well-liked member of the community end up the victim of an unprovoked violent act? And what happens when justice eludes us for over half a century? Daniel Ashton Walker was well-liked and well-respected in his community for his kind disposition and always readiness to provide a helping hand to those in need. But the peacefulness of his life was suddenly upended on that tragic October 1, 1974 morning. He had no idea that a gloomy cloud was gathering over his peaceful existence. Daniel's day began as any other, with little indication of the disaster that would befall him. Daniel went about his everyday activities, not realizing that his life was about to take a drastic shift as the sun rose higher and higher in the sky, illuminating the heavens in shades of orange and pink. Daniel's Volkswagen van was parked in San Bernardino County, California, alongside Interstate 40, some 60 miles west of Needles. Ken Robinson, an 18-year-old hitchhiker, accompanied him on the ride. They had made the decision to pause their travels and recuperate for a bit. He packed up his van and departed from his family in Santa Ana the previous day, heading back home. The vastness of the California desert opened up in front of them, providing a brief break from the routine of their everyday existence. Daniel and Ken settled down to get ready for a little break in their journey as the clock reached 6 in the morning. They lay back in the van, enjoying the quiet before the storm, as the serene tranquility of the early morning hours engulfed them. The abrupt crackling of gunfire startled Daniel, shattering the peace of their little rest. A shooter who was yet unidentified had come out of the shadows and ripped through the still morning air with a hail of bullets. Daniel was struck several times while unprepared and at a loss for protection. Fearful and driven by survival instinct, Ken avoided the onslaught as the mayhem spread. They ran from the scene, running into the darkness of the early morning as they prayed for rescue. They eventually managed to stop a passing driver who immediately called the police. As soon as emergency responders arrived, they got to work moving Daniel to a local hospital. Daniel's life was sadly cut short as a result of his injuries, despite the medical team's best efforts to stabilize him. On the verge of turning 22, Daniel Ashton Walker was a cherished young man who had passed away. With unyielding devotion, law enforcement searched the site painstakingly for any evidence that would provide light on the identity of the elusive attacker. Detectives first believed that the shooting was motivated by robbery as they investigated Daniel's terrible death, but confusing facts surfaced that called into question this theory. The thieves had surprisingly only taken $80 from Daniel, mysteriously leaving behind travelers' checks totaling a sizable $600. The fact that the attackers had left Daniel's motorcycle, stereo, and luggage in the back of his vehicle undisclosed further complicated the situation. Law enforcement officers in California, Nevada, and Arizona were alerted and stopped each gold van that fit the reported description after receiving a detailed description of the suspect's vehicle. When the suspect's gold van got trapped in the sand earlier that morning, the delivery man told investigators that the suspects waved him down. One of the suspects informed the delivery man that they were traveling to Indiana and that, in case they were stranded, they would use the sagebrush and shotgun to shoot down poles to provide traction for their tires. The delivery man assisted with the van's towing but declined to be paid for his work. The fact that law enforcement authorities from other states coordinated highlighted how serious the issue was. This demonstrated their dedication to obtaining information and making sure that the person or people responsible for this senseless act would face consequences. Although Ken's narrative included some insightful details, the attack's true motivation remained a mystery. Detectives looked at a variety of ideas as the investigation went on to try to explain the violent, seemingly random act. They looked at the chances that it was a random act of aggression and the potential that it was a targeted attack with personal motivations. The fact that the incident was committed in a rural area along a lonely route made the investigation much more difficult. It became more challenging to determine if the attackers planned the attack or took advantage of a chance that knocked. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office conducted a comprehensive investigation, but they were unable to resolve the issue. The Sheriff's Department's cold case unit persistently pursued new leads in the case over the course of 5 decades, revisiting it on occasion. Nevertheless, time proved to be a powerful foe, and the team was unable to gather any useful information to ultimately solve Daniel Ashton Walker's case. On November 15, 2023, a noteworthy advancement occurred when the cold case team decided to pick up where they left off. In January 2024, they were able to identify the main suspect in the case as the notorious serial killer, 73-year-old Thomas Eugene Creech, thanks to their intensified efforts. Critical information, including verified personal data from Creech's own admissions regarding the killing case, served as the foundation for this breakthrough. The district attorney's offices in San Bernardino County, California, and Ada County, Idaho, worked together to guarantee the accuracy of their conclusions. As a result of Creech's increased cooperation, the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office was consulted regarding the next steps in Daniel Walker's legal pursuit. Shortly after Daniel's clemency hearing, Thomas Eugene Creech, a convicted offender with a history of repeated confessions, was brought into the case. He is the longest-serving prisoner in Idaho and is scheduled to be put to death for multiple killings. Although he has only been found guilty of 5 crimes, other people think he may be accountable for over 40 separate killings. They think this because he confessed to killing 42 individuals in more than a dozen places in America during his trial in 1975. Authorities have confirmed Creech's claims on Daniel's case, although his public attorney expressed issues regarding the timing of these disclosures. They implied that previous attempts to connect Creech to other killings had been unfounded. Prosecutors in Ada County characterized Creech as a manipulative and unrepentant sociopath, raising the possibility that his latest remarks were a premeditated attempt to evade execution. The seriousness of the matter and Creech's nuanced personality lent even more intrigue to Daniel's quest for justice. San Bernardino County is getting closer to conclusion as Thomas Eugene Creech is named as the main suspect in Daniel Walker's case. Justice in this sad case of needless murder may finally be served after over 50 years, providing some comfort to Daniel's loved ones and the community at large. Doug Walker, Daniel's brother, wrote and self-published Daniel, My Brother, Mystery in the Mojave on Amazon. Doug claimed to have given his brother's character 2 whole chapters in the novel. Daniel's father stated in their final letter to him, "Everyone talks so highly of you, always and without exception. Whether they intend to extradite and prosecute Creech has not yet been made public by the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office. We have received the complaints and are keeping in touch with the Ada County District Attorney's Office and our San Bernardino County investigative team in order to pursue justice in this case," according to spokeswoman Jacqueline Rodriguez. According to Doug Walker, killing Creech is not always the right kind of justice. He stated, "I don't mind at all if they can show that whoever did it, did it. It is not my decision to determine if they die or not. That's above my salary level."
Moving on to the next case.
Dylan Rounds. What became of Idaho farmer Dylan Rounds, a 19-year-old? How could a young man who was well known for his outdoor passion just disappear? Does he remain alive? These are the questions that have engulfed the farming villages in East Idaho's rural areas where Dylan grew up surrounded by breathtaking scenery. When Dylan was only 4 years old, his parents, Justin and Candace Rounds, got divorced. As a result, he divided his time between Idaho Falls, where his father lived, and Twin Falls, where their mother lived, along with his younger brother and sister. Even though they were far apart, Dylan felt a strong connection to the outdoors, a fundamental part of Idahoan culture at both places. He was deeply in love with the wilderness at an early age, finding pleasure and comfort there. Dylan had a distinct love for the outdoors, whether he was climbing through dense forests, fishing in crystal-clear mountain streams, or just exploring tough terrain. On May 28, 2022, the young man, who was well known for his love of the outdoors and his spirit of adventure, was reported missing. That morning, he called his grandma and told her he was taking the grain truck into shelter. After that, he did not hear from her again. Dylan abruptly disappeared from his own farm property in Lewiston, Nevada, where he was residing in an RV trailer close to the Nevada-Utah line. This led to a murder inquiry that uncovered a startling chain of events. Unsettling evidence was swiftly found during the investigation. A pair of Dylan's boots was found by deputies close to his property during the first search for him. DNA testing identified a bloodstain on one of the boots as belonging to Dylan, and the boots also contained the DNA of a guy named James Brenner. This implied the possibility of manipulation following Dylan's vanishing. Around the time of Dylan's disappearance, Brenner was known to be a squatter living on Dylan's land. Brenner was one of Dylan's last contacts before he vanished, according to his parents. Dylan's phone records were then examined, and they showed that he had been at a secluded Luton property on the day before he disappeared. Dylan's phone's last signal was located at the Lewiston Pond. After doing a complete search, Dylan's phone was found. A time-lapse movie that was shot around the time of Dylan's disappearance was discovered through digital forensic examination of his phone. Brenner was seen in the video cleaning a gun with obvious bloodstains on his shirt and arms. Authorities examined the clothing and determined that Dylan's DNA was present. The evidence was mounting, and it was clear that Brenner was involved in Dylan Rounds' abduction and likely death. Dylan's family and the community awaited justice as detectives carried out their job, hoping for answers that would put an end to this awful case. Based on strong evidence acquired during the inquiry, Brenner was charged with 2 major felonies in March 2023. First-degree felony and abuse or degradation of a human body, which is also a third-degree crime. The time-lapse video, the shirt Brenner wore in the video that showed traces of Dylan's DNA, and the DNA found on Dylan's boots that were found during the initial search efforts were the main pieces of evidence that the prosecution used to build their case. The investigation brought Brenner's worrisome criminal past to light in addition to the evidence findings. His violent past was well documented, and he had already served a prison sentence for felon in possession of a firearm. Dylan's family and the community continued to hold out hope for justice and resolution in the heartbreaking tragedy as the court process moved forward. Because of the overwhelming evidence and Brenner's past, a bleak picture was drawn, making both the public and the authorities eager for this tragic saga to come to an end. Authorities continued to aggressively search for Dylan's body as part of the ongoing investigation into his abduction and probable death. Extensive searches have been conducted in the regions where Dylan was last observed, with a particular emphasis on sites connected to the evidence amassed in Brenner's case. Dylan was not found by the detectives, and their search was abandoned. Brenner and the Box Elder County Attorney's Office reached a plea agreement in 2024. He had to reveal Dylan's last resting place in order to have his charges dropped. Eventually, on April 9, 2024, nearly 2 years later, Dylan's skeleton remains were found in the isolated Lewiston area of western Box Elder County. He was shot in the head and died as a result. Dylan's family has set up a Facebook page and a special website. The initial goals of these platforms were to disseminate information about the continuing search operations, make updates on the investigation's progress, and give the community a way to offer tips or information that could help in the Dylan search. After he was located, they made use of the platforms to support more national searches for missing persons. The consequences of violence and the community's unwavering quest for the truth are brought home by Dylan's story. More than 24 of Dylan's family members were present for the sentencing on July 1, 2024. Brenner was told by Dylan's father, "This is how you repay Dylan for all the times he helped you. All I can hope is that you consider this for the rest of your life." Brenner was hired by Dylan to labor on his farm, and on occasion, the two of them even shared meals. Brenner has not spoken to the court or provided any more details regarding the events that led him to kill Dylan. He refused to stand in front of Dylan's family as well as other friends and supporters who had come in the courtroom. James Brenner received a sentence that included a maximum 30-year jail term. Because of his lack of empathy, the judge will encourage the parole board to keep him behind bars for as long as feasible. Although the court aspect of it, and the worry of constantly waiting to find out what will happen, when, and what if it doesn't, are things we can now put to rest, according to Dylan's mother, it does not necessarily put it to rest. While we had hoped for a better outcome, we knew from the beginning that Dylan was no longer living, according to another family member. With this latest revelation, the investigation has completed its full circle, allowing us to finally return Dylan home and bring this chapter to an end.
Moving on to the next case.
The Anjikuni Mystery. In every region of the world, there have been rumors that have circulated about strange mass disappearances. One of the most well-known examples of this type of case is the mystery surrounding the fate of the people who lived in Roanoke Colony because they were last seen alive on 15/87. The first half of the 21st century, however, was the time period in which one of the most intriguing occurrences of mass disappearance occurred. A Canadian hunter by the name of Joe Labelet entered a community on the shores of Lake Anjikuni, which is located in the territory of Nunavut, Canada, on a chilly night in November 1930. Lake Anjikuni is located in northwestern Canada. In spite of the fact that he was worn out, hungry, and chilly, he was looking forward to spending the night at the Inuit community since he had a positive relationship with the people who lived there. Nevertheless, there was a significant problem. The community had fallen into a spooky silence, and there was not a single person to be found anywhere in the vicinity. Inside of one of the residences, he discovered a pot of stew that was still simmering and steaming on the stove. The clothes of the residents was gathered together in a single location, and a great number of sleds were spotted laying around. Joe was under the impression that the members of the group had traveled on foot wherever they had gone. Nevertheless, when he made his way around the perimeter of the settlement, he noticed that there was not a single footprint remaining in the snow. After a couple of days had passed, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were made aware of this peculiar occurrence, and they swiftly sent a number of officers to conduct an investigation. During their search of the village, they came across the fact that the local cemetery had been desecrated. It appeared as though each and every body had been removed and disinterred previously. What is even more peculiar is that the officers reported seeing a bright blue light that pulsed intensely on the horizon above them. 3 miles away and several hours earlier, a fur trapper by the name of Armand Laurent and his 2 boys were making their way to a neighboring cabin in order to seek refuge when they noticed a cigar-shaped object floating silently above them. As soon as they were unable to respond, the object underwent a transformation and began moving in the direction of the Anjikuni settlement. As of right now, there is not much else that is known about this case. If there is one thing that can be said with absolute certainty, it is that during the month of November in the year 1930, roughly 30 people, including men, women, and children, reportedly left their homes and disappeared from the face of the planet. If these unfortunate victims were murdered, or if something supernatural took place there, it is possible that we will never know the truth.
Moving on to the next case.
Theo Hayes. While Australia is home to some of the most magnificent terrain and oceans in the world, its immensity makes it an unforgiving vacation destination where nothing is certain save adventure. Situated in Australia's New South Wales, Byron Bay is a perfect blend of adventure and spiritual awakening, with a hint of pretentiousness mixed in with the stunning scenery. Byron Bay boasts a vibrant nightlife and is a well-liked travel destination for the daring and well-informed. However, some who have been there claim that the area's rugged Lost Coast vibe can come across as a little pompous. Most visitors to the neighborhood report that the people there are typically cordial to those passing through, although some older inhabitants seem to be cautious of the steady stream of mainly young and foreign faces. With almost 2 million tourists annually, this very small town is distinct in that it has more visitors than residents. Theo Hayes, an 18-year-old Belgian, was one of those guests. He had traveled around Australia for the most of the previous year. Theo was initially undecided about going to college like many of his friends or taking a gap year to travel, but in the end, he concluded that studying engineering in college could wait a year because adventure never stops. But as his gap year would soon come to an end amid dire uncertainty for friends and family, he would soon discover that misadventure is just as impatient and fickle a creature. People close to Theo said he had a great time on his trip. He spent a lot of time with his cousin Lisa Hayes, who cherished her memories of Theo's distinct viewpoint on taking a year off. She remembers that Theo was much more methodical in his pursuit of spiritual fulfillment through nature, whereas other recent high school graduates were spending their first year of freedom abusing recreational drugs and imbibing excessive amounts of alcohol. According to friends who knew him in Belgium as well as Australia, Theo was the kind of person who genuinely cared about having a meaningful conversation and made an effort to build relationships with people wherever he went. His relative also remembers his aptitude for organizing and planning. Theo was regarded as one of the more responsible kids in his age group. He had regular, multiple weekly conversations with his mother and remained connected to his family who lived abroad. The 18-year-old arrived on Wednesday, May 29, 2019, at Byron Bay. His unofficial schedule was to spend the rest of his vacation time lounging around the city. He didn't have to do anything in particular as long as he could get to his Greyhound bus, which would return him to the Sydney-Melbourne area on June 3rd. After that, he intended to take a plane back to Belgium to begin the next phase of his adventure, which would take him to college and eventually a job. One of the nicer and more reputable hostels in the neighborhood, Wake Up Hostel, was the place Theo decided to stay. The hostel, which is situated in Belangol, is just a 20-minute walk from the town square, making it a popular destination for tourists while being somewhat remote from the main downtown area. In addition to offering a free shuttle to and from town, Wake Up Hostel lets visitors bring their bikes as an extra draw for low-cost vacationers. The entire Byron Bay town is fairly compact, and many claim that if you're fit enough, you can walk everywhere in the town, negating the need for a car. Theo was able to secure a private room at the hostel. Despite being the only guest, Theo quickly bonded with other backpackers, which his loved ones fondly remembers as being quite typical of him. He also did not waste any time in exploring the local social scene to make the most of his final days in the nation he had lived in for over a year. On May 31, 2019, Theo arrived in town early in the evening by the free shuttle bus. This would be the final night anyone would ever see him. It was a really cold night in the heart of winter in Australia. In actuality, it was the coldest night in Byron's history during the months of May and June. According to historical weather data from the Cape Byron Weather Station, the temperature reached a high of 17 degrees Celsius or 62 degrees Fahrenheit that day, but by sunset, it had dropped all the way to 9 degrees Celsius or just 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Theo and his buddies would not have anticipated this low temperature because it is unusual for the region. Theo headed to the Great Northern Hotel with his friends to get some rose wine. They are seen making the purchase at 7:45 p.m. on CCTV footage. Detectives subsequently acquired security footage, and nothing strange or suspicious was shown. It appeared to be a typical alcohol purchase made by carefree young men getting ready for a night on the town. Theo and his new companions bought the rose, then took the free shuttle bus back to the hostel to enjoy the wine on the hostel porch with other guests. Later, Theo and a few other visitors took the shuttle once more, this time to Cheeky Monkey's, a popular pub with a reputation for being among Australia's most violent establishments in the early 2000s, according to some residents. While this might have been the case in 2019, the bar's reputation for mischief has reportedly altered as a result of a chain corporation taking it. Though it is a few blocks from the main town center, this bar is quite centrally located as it is situated on one of the town's two main roadways. Walking through the town at night has been described by visitors as an unsettling experience due to inadequate lighting and frequently very little foot traffic. Although Byron, a beach town, is busy during the summer, there is less of a tourist influx in the winter, and this particular night was particularly quiet because of the unusually cold weather. Bartenders at Cheeky Monkey's later claimed that they were only approximately 25% full. Theo bought 2 drinks from the bar, and that, along with the wine he had already had, apparently resulted in some form of noticeable inebriation since, at approximately 11 p.m., security personnel led Theo out. According to witnesses, Theo was clumsy on his feet rather than being crude. Although there is disagreement over how he was led out, CCTV shows him leaving the bar. The final known moment Theo Hayes was seen alive would be captured in this video. It was easy to return from the bar to the hostel. Even at night after a few beers, locals claim that finding Wake Up Hostel would not be too difficult if you just followed the neon signs and bright lights. Theo's Google data revealed that he never returned to the hostel that evening, despite the fact that it should have only taken him 20 minutes to walk there. This suggests that Theo made an effort to go there. At 11 p.m., Theo departed from the bar. The CCTV film captures him leaving the bar and entering the dimly lighted sidewalks of Kingsley Street, which is a street that runs parallel to Johnson. Theo then went on to take the most ridiculous path at occasionally unsettling speeds, a decision that has baffled friends, family, and investigators. Theo went away from the hostel even though he had a phone to inform him differently, according to data from Google Maps. He turned into Tennyson Street from Kingsley Street and proceeded to the wide open field that served as the Youth Recreation Center. The information indicates that he proceeded to walk quickly all the way to the Millen track. Though the statistics is not perfect, it's possible that he was racing. Theo traveled quickly through the Millen track and then, in a very roundabout way, made his way to Tallow Beach, which is adjacent. Investigators claim that if you weren't familiar with the location, it would have been very impossible to navigate through the dense undergrowth that this trail would have brought him through at such high speeds. For this reason, among others, there are conjectures that Theo was not by himself. His route was peculiar to relatives and residents alike. The hostel was the other way, as anyone with eyes could see. Theo had been walking with someone, so where was he heading, and was he alone? His parents thought he was a gregarious and secure individual who would never have gone anywhere without a friend. The fact that Theo made it through in such a short period of time is very surprising because locals claim that the pitch blackness of the bush that Theo was moving through at that time of night may be disorienting even to people who are familiar with the area. The fact that few tourists visit that location adds to the suspicion that Theo was not alone. The Milne track is not particularly impressive or lovely, nor is it particularly approachable. The track merely heads out to the shore of Talos Beach from Milne Street, passing through thick, harsh vegetation. The place is neither noteworthy nor exceptional. According to data from Google Maps, Theo swiftly left the bushland and walked in the direction of Cozy Corner Beach. Theo continued to message people while all of this was going on. From there, officials obtained Theo's cell phone records, which indicate that throughout this period, he texted several buddies. Because the texts were in French, his native tongue, and were written in his syntactically expressive manner, his pals are adamant that he was the one sending them and not a fraud. According to police reports, Theo messaged a buddy on Facebook at 12:50 in the morning about a forthcoming YouTube tour that was scheduled to take place in Australia. At 12:55 a.m., Theo texted his stepsister his last text message. The prior text, CIE, which is the French word for thank you followed by an emoji of a kiss, was not made public by the police. The message was on WhatsApp. This was the final message he ever sent to anyone that we are aware of. Theo also watched an unidentified YouTube video during this time, according to Google data that the authorities obtained. Information taken from his Google account indicates that he used Google Maps several times to find the way back to his backpacker hostel, but it's unclear why he chose to stray from the straightforward instructions the Google Maps program would have provided. And then, just before midnight, Theo lost connection. On June 1st, the next afternoon at 1:42 p.m., Theo's cell phone signal rang. Theo's phone was on at that specific moment, but no one knows for sure how long or why. The police have not released this information because this ping, which differs from internet data usage, is simply a connection of the cell phone talking to a local cell tower, something even non-smartphones do. The Cape Byron cell tower, which is near Cozy Corner Beach, was the tower to which it was connected. Theo's phone was never able to establish a cellular connection again after this 142-meter ping. Even after Theo's checkout date had passed, the hostel refused to report him missing for a few days. The setting and location of this specific backpackers hostel are often overlooked by critics and media stories, despite the fact that some were extremely critical of the decision for delaying the crucial 48 hours of a missing person investigation. The hostel had no first cause for concern because of the vast volume of young guests that arrive and depart from this area without notice. Tourists who came to rediscover their spiritual side via nature frequently used drugs and alcohol. Thus, this kind of conduct was not abnormal and was typically the result of wanderlust rather than bad luck. Eventually, Theo's mother contacted the local authorities after nearly 72 hours had passed without hearing from him. An investigation into missing persons was launched, but by then, a lot of people had complained that the trail had dried up. When investigators investigated his hostel room, they discovered it to be unaltered, free of any indications of a struggle or that Theo had made an attempt to pack up and leave. His passport, hygiene products, and bags were all still in their original locations, and it appeared that he had brought along just enough for a one-night out. Authorities searched the area around Byron Bay thoroughly, combing through the air, land, and water. In an attempt to locate Theo, the search and rescue team sent dogs, drones, helicopters, climbers, and divers. Theo's parents arrived at Byron Bay on May 10th and started looking for him with the help of neighborhood volunteers. They posted flyers for missing persons all around the town, but despite their best efforts, they were unable to locate Theo. Officially, the police canceled the physical search on July 3rd. Volunteers kept looking for the 18-year-old missing for almost a month after he was reported missing. A volunteer search team discovered a cap a few days later, on July 7th, which seemed to be the same as the one that Theo was last seen wearing in the CCTV film that the police had gotten. The location of the lighthouse where his phone had last rung was where the cap was discovered. Although a DNA test result has not yet been made public, Theo's family is positive that his hat was discovered. Theo is one of the more than 2,600 individuals in Australia on the long-term missing list. Those who haven't been seen or heard from in 3 months or more are placed in this category. Only a few kilometers from Byron Bay, 6 people on the list vanish, and their enigmatic disappearances remain unsolved. The fatalities occur over a 3-decade period, and although the police claim they do not believe there is a link between the deaths and age, race, or gender, they are unable to rule out any linkages at this time, either generally or within patterns or subgroups of previous missing victims. 3 weeks after Theo vanished from sight, a Byron local discovered a big stick bearing a menacing message and a disturbing suggestion while strolling around the Clark's Beach dunes. There looked to be bloodstains on the big stick. The wife of the guy who found the stick remembers that her husband saw the blood-like smears and the weird lettering first, then the obtrusive object while he was strolling. While she waited for the police to come get the stick, she shared a photo of it on social media. She claims that although the authorities did remove the stick from her, they did not process the area like they would have a crime scene or take any pictures of the surrounding area. The words, "The Judge," are in large black characters on a pole that is thick in the girth and measures about 1.5 meters, or about 5 feet, long. Duct tape is used to wrap one end of the stick. Although there has been no update on this case, investigators frequently conceal test data to rule out fake confessions or avoid impeding an arrest. Shortly afterward, a woman reported to the police that she had seen 2 guys on the Pacific Highway on June 2nd, 2 days after Theo vanished. About 4:30 a.m., one of the males, who looked to be in his 40s, flagged her down close to Coffs Harbor, which is about 240 kilometers south of Byron Bay. The second man appeared to be dead or comatose as he lay there on the road. She felt scared, so she chose not to stop, and she later called the police and posted a video of the incident on Facebook. She is crying in it because she thinks someone might have suffered terrible injuries. Despite searching the area, the men were not located by the police. Later, when the woman saw a news article on Theo, she noticed that the man who was lying in the road was dressed in the same light-colored slacks and black shoes that Theo had been spotted wearing on CCTV when he was last seen alive. She reported it to the authorities, but she never heard back. Theo's father has the final say for the time being. While at the police station, he made an emotional plea to the media, saying, "I promised Theo's little brother that I would bring his brother home. Please assist me in honoring my pledge to him."
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.